Long before the cities rose like jagged teeth against the horizon, the people of Orath lived in harmony with the unseen rhythms that governed the world. Every morning the sun rose on a pattern no one could name. Every tide carried secrets in the rise and fall of its silver arms, and every leaf whispered of cycles too vast to be recorded in books. Life itself was a song, a pulse that linked the hearts of all living things to the heavens, to the stars, to the earth beneath their feet. Children were taught to listen first, to feel the world's heartbeat, and only then to speak. For the spoken word, untempered, could fall out of time and bring chaos. It was in those early years, when Orath thrummed with the unseen music of existence, that the people began to forget. The memory of rhythm faded gradually, almost imperceptibly, as iron towers rose from fertile valleys, and machines began to hum their own cadence over the world. The people clung to their schedules, to clocks, to precise orders, believing that they could impose control over the ceaseless patterns of the cosmos. But no matter how strict their calendars or how detailed their records, the cycles of nature and star could not be bent to human whim. Storms came without warning. Rivers swelled in months unmarked. The birds did not wait for permission to migrate, and the crops withered under a sun that obeyed no ledger. Among the first to sense the disruption was a girl named Lira. She was small and quiet, with hair the color of burnt copper, and eyes that always seemed to follow something invisible in the sky. While other children learned the structured rituals of work and obedience, Lira wandered the forests and hills, listening to the wind, tracing the motion of clouds, counting the silent pulse in the sway of trees. She could feel the cycles still, faint and muted, as though the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for someone to remember. Her grandmother, one of the last true keepers of the old ways, tried to teach her. "Do not listen only with your ears," she whispered one evening as the moon rose half swallowed by haze. "Listen with your bones, with your blood, with your breath. The rhythm is there, even when it is hidden." But the world had already begun to turn its back on the old knowledge. The age of disruption, as it would later be called, was relentless. Machines poured smoke into the sky. Pounding pistons drowned the subtle wind, and towers of iron and glass blocked the stars. The people, thinking themselves masters, labored in noise and haste, their lives measured by the strict beats of factory bells and council decrees. Rhythm became something to ignore, something primitive and quaint. Lira could feel the pulse weakening, as though the earth itself had grown tired of being unheard. One day, while wandering along the banks of a river that had once been the heart of her village, Lira saw signs of the old world in fragments. The riverbed, dry in patches, revealed carvings in stone, weathered and nearly erased. Spirals, lines, dots, concentric circles that suggested movement, repetition, and balance. She knelt, tracing the grooves with her fingers, feeling a vibration beneath the stone that hummed faintly through her bones. It was the song of the planet itself, buried under centuries of neglect and dust. Her heart thrummed with a mixture of awe and sorrow. She could remember it because she had always remembered it, instinctively, but no one else did. Her peers mocked her attention to wind and river, calling her a dreamer, a fool who wasted time tracing invisible patterns. The councils and governors dismissed her as a child obsessed with nonsense. They told her that the world was mechanical now, ordered by men and laws, not by stars and rivers, and that she would be happier obeying schedules and completing tasks instead of chasing invisible rhythms. Yet the rhythm would not be silenced. At night, in her small quarters, she would sit by the window and feel it in her chest, the slow, steady pulse that mirrored the tides, the hum of unseen energy, the faint song of the cosmos echoing in the spaces between the stars. She began to write down what she felt in a small journal, drawings of spirals and arcs, notations of the rise and fall of tides, of wind, of the moon's passage. She wrote of patterns no one had names for, of cycles that threaded through life and death and back again, weaving all things together. It was during one such night, when the wind carried a chill and the stars were unusually bright, that she first heard the soft whisper of warning. She had been studying the motion of the clouds over the distant mountains, noting the pattern of storms and droughts, when a voice rose in her mind. Not hers, not any living thing she could see, but a voice that seemed to belong to the earth itself. "You are remembering. Do not let them silence the pulse." Lira shivered and clutched her journal. She had no fear of spirits, only of the world forgetting entirely. She knew that if the old knowledge vanished completely, the people would remain blind to the cycles, and chaos would reign unchecked. The next day, she began to gather fragments of the old teachings wherever she could find them. Broken stones, tattered scrolls, fragments of instruments that had once measured the sky. She hid them beneath her bed, in cracks of walls, in hollowed trees, creating secret caches that no one would notice. As she worked, the age of disruption advanced. Cities grew taller, engines louder, and the pace of life quickened. People forgot even to look at the stars. Farmers ignored planting cycles, relying solely on machines to water and harvest, though the machines could not correct for the subtle shifts in moonlight or rainfall. Rivers changed their courses. Lands that had been fertile became barren, and yet the pulse persisted, faint and hidden, waiting for recognition. Lira knew that if she wanted to preserve it, she had to leave the cities. The governors would never allow the old knowledge to flourish. They thrived on unpredictability because fear and uncertainty kept the population obedient. To them, rhythm was dangerous because rhythm implied order beyond their control, a pattern that could not be taxed, regulated, or weaponized. One evening, as the sun set in flames across the horizon, Lira made her decision. She packed her journals, her instruments, and her flute, and slipped into the wilderness that bordered the crumbling cities, leaving behind the noise and control of men for the whispering cycles of the earth. Her journey into the wilderness was perilous. Machines and cities encroached even here, leaving scars on the land. Broken pylons, rusted turbines, and polluted streams testified to human neglect. Yet as she traveled, Lira began to sense the pulse strengthening. She walked along riverbeds that still remembered their paths, and the water seemed to hum in recognition as she touched it. She slept beneath trees whose roots intertwined with forgotten currents of energy, and in her dreams, the moon moved with measured grace, planets aligning in patterns she had never seen yet somehow knew. It was in these nights, beneath an expanse of stars, that she first began to understand the depth of what had been lost. The cycles were not merely agricultural or seasonal. They governed thought, emotion, even the rise and fall of societies. Wars, famines, migrations, all of it had its rhythm, and when humans ignored that rhythm, suffering was inevitable. The governor's obsession with control had blinded them to the natural beat of the cosmos, and now the consequences were unfolding. One dawn, after weeks of wandering, Lira came upon a ruined temple at the edge of a valley. Its walls were scarred with ancient symbols, spirals, waves, stars within circles, marks of cycles within cycles. Here, she discovered the remnants of the keepers who had once taught humanity to live in harmony with rhythm. She traced the markings, her fingers vibrating with the resonance of the pulse she had been following all her life. Within the temple, fragments of scrolls and instruments lay scattered, pieces of knowledge that could be pieced together to form the forgotten song of the world. Lira began the slow work of reconstruction. Each night she compared the movements of wind, water, and celestial bodies with the remnants she had found. Each pattern she discerned, each rhythm she remembered was like a spark of life in a world that had nearly gone silent. She realized that the pulse of the universe was not just metaphor. It was mathematical, precise, and yet dynamic, responding to human and natural actions alike. She recorded her findings in her journals, drawing notations of planetary alignments, river flows, and human activity, weaving them into an intricate tapestry. As she worked, she felt the presence of the pulse more keenly, as though the universe itself were aware of her recognition. The winds carried messages, the trees whispered encouragement, and even the stars seemed to shift slightly to illuminate her path. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. She understood that she had a responsibility beyond herself to preserve this knowledge, to remember the rhythm, and perhaps one day to teach it once more to those who had forgotten. And so, Lira settled into her solitary vigil in the wilderness, becoming both student and guardian of the cosmic cycles. She listened to the Earth's heartbeat each day, mapping, noting, and following patterns invisible to most. Her flute sang in the quiet of night, each note a thread in the tapestry of existence, each melody a reminder that all things move in cycles, and that those cycles, once remembered, could guide humanity back toward balance. She knew the path ahead would be fraught with danger. Governors and enforcers might seek to destroy her knowledge. She might wander alone for years, perhaps never reaching the cities to share what she had learned. Yet in the deep, steady rhythm of her heart and in the quiet pulse of the world around her, she found hope. The knowledge was not truly lost, it was only waiting to be remembered. And as long as she listened, as long as she followed the hidden beat, she could keep the cycles alive. The wilderness stretched endlessly, a shifting tapestry of stone, water, and sky, where shadows of forgotten mountains met the edges of forests thick with ancient trees. Lira moved cautiously, the weight of her journals and instruments on her back a constant reminder that she carried not only knowledge, but responsibility. Each step she took was measured, guided by the faint pulse that had been growing stronger ever since she left the cities behind. The rhythm that had been silenced for generations seemed to whisper to her in every breeze, in every trickle of water over mossy stones, and in the quiet cadence of her own heartbeat. She followed it like a beacon, certain it would lead her to deeper understanding, though she did not yet know what form that understanding would take. As she traveled, she encountered signs of the world's disruption. Rivers that had once followed predictable courses now veered erratically, flooding lands that had long been safe and leaving other fields cracked and dry. Storms appeared without warning, and she watched clouds convulse in patterns that defied simple weather prediction. Animals, too, moved erratically, their migrations disrupted. Even the stars seemed to shift slightly, as though the heavens themselves were restless. Yet amidst all this chaos, Lira felt the underlying rhythm persist. It was faint, almost imperceptible at times, but unmistakably present. One night, as she rested beneath the skeletal branches of an old oak, a rustling in the underbrush alerted her. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in tattered robes, moving with the careful precision of someone who had walked these lands for decades. His face, partially hidden by the hood, bore the lines of age and thought, and his eyes held a depth that made Lira instinctively bow in respect. "I've been expecting you," he said, his voice low and measured, carrying an authority that seemed to resonate with the pulse around them. Not many still listen. Lira rose cautiously. "You know of the rhythm?" she asked, clutching her journal closer. The old man nodded, stepping closer so that the lantern he carried cast long shadows across the ground. "I am called Aedric," he said. "I was once a timekeeper, one of those who ensured that the cycles were preserved and honored. But the cities fell into disorder, and most of my fellows were silenced. Only a few remained to remember the old ways, and you, child, are among them." Lira felt a shiver run down her spine. I thought I was alone." "Alone in the cities, yes," Aedric replied. "But not in the wilderness. The pulse persists. I have been following it, as you are, waiting for someone who still hears it clearly." He gestured toward a nearby clearing, where the moonlight revealed patterns in the grass and stones, markings that seemed to shimmer faintly in the night. "These symbols," he said, pointing, "record the movement of the moon, the tides, the winds, the growth of trees. They are part of the knowledge of rhythm, a language lost to most, but understood by those who listen. For hours, Lira and Aedric worked together, tracing the patterns in the soil, comparing them with the sketches in her journals. Aedric taught her to feel the cadence of the winds, to anticipate the flow of water, to hear the subtlest shifts in the Earth's tremor. He showed her how the movements of planets, though distant, influenced the cycles of life below, guiding migrations, the bloom of flowers, and even the oscillations of human emotion. "You must understand," Aedric said, his voice grave. "The rhythm is not merely a pattern to observe. It is a law. It governs cause and effect, action and consequence. Ignoring it leads to imbalance. The cities are suffering because they have abandoned it. The governors enforce order without listening, thinking they can control time itself. But time is not theirs to command. Lira nodded, absorbing his words. "Then I must remember it," she whispered, though her throat trembled at the weight of the responsibility. "And I must help others remember it too." Adric's eyes gleamed faintly in the moonlight. "Yes, but first you must learn the dance. To walk in rhythm is not merely to observe, it is to participate. Planting, moving, speaking, even thinking must align with the hidden pulse. Only then will you see the cycles clearly. Only then will the knowledge serve its purpose." Over the following weeks, Lira trained under Adric's guidance. Each day began before dawn, with exercises designed to attune her senses to subtle fluctuations in light, temperature, and wind. She learned to plant seeds not according to a calendar, but according to the silent rhythm she now began to perceive. The swelling of the soil, the alignment of the moon, the passage of clouds overhead. Each note she played on her flute corresponded to a movement of the sun or a shift in the stars, and she soon discovered that her music could influence the growth of plants and even the migration of birds that nested in the nearby forests. At first, the changes were small, imperceptible to anyone else. Flowers opened more fully, seedlings thrived where previously they had wilted, and the wind seemed to respond to the timbre of her music. But as Lira's understanding deepened, she began to perceive the larger cycles, the way weather, agriculture, and human life intertwined. She realized that even the rise and fall of political fortunes, the tides of war and peace were part of the rhythm, and that ignoring them could have catastrophic consequences. One night, as they sat near a still pond, Adric spoke of a deeper mystery. "The knowledge of rhythm extends beyond the earth," he said. "It reaches the stars. Each galaxy, each solar system, pulses in patterns we can scarcely imagine. The human mind, in its smallness, echoes these patterns. When we align ourselves with them, we become part of the cosmic dance. When we ignore them, we fall into chaos." Lira listened, mesmerized. She realized that her dreams had begun to reflect this truth. She dreamt of galaxies spinning in intricate loops, rivers of light folding over themselves, and stars rising and falling in synchrony with her own heartbeat. She awoke with a clarity she had never known before, her flute notes resonating with a new profound awareness, but their tranquility was not to last. Word of a wandering mystic reached the governors of the nearby cities. They feared that someone who remembered the rhythm could disrupt their control over the people. Soldiers and enforcers were dispatched to find Lira, to silence her before she could teach others the forgotten ways. One morning, as Lira and Aedric traced the motion of the river's current through the forest, they found footprints that were not natural, boots pressed into the soft earth, moving deliberately toward their hidden sanctuary. Lira's pulse quickened. "They're here," she whispered. Aedric's eyes narrowed. "Then you must leave. I will delay them." "But you've taught me so much," Lira said, panic rising in her chest. "I cannot abandon this knowledge." "You must," he said firmly. "The knowledge is yours now. You will carry it further than I could. Remember the pulse and let it guide you. Do not waste time on fear." Lira nodded reluctantly, understanding the gravity of his words. With her flute and journals secured, she set out alone, following the river and the rhythm she had learned to trust. Aedric remained behind, hiding in the shadows of the trees, preparing to mislead the pursuers. As she traveled deeper into the wilderness, Lira began to notice subtler patterns than she had before. The wind seemed to shift to guide her along hidden paths, and birds alighted briefly to mark safe crossings. Even the stars overhead appeared to move in arcs that mirrored the path she needed to take. She understood now that the knowledge of rhythm was not simply about observation, it was about participation. By aligning herself with the cycles, she could move through danger and disruption with minimal resistance. Days turned into weeks. Lira learned to predict the rain, to anticipate the rise and fall of rivers, to read the subtle changes in the earth that signaled landslides or unstable terrain. She began to understand the hidden music of the world, the interconnectedness of all things, and she felt an increasing sense of responsibility. The cities were in chaos, but she carried within her the potential for restoration. It was during one quiet night, under a crescent moon, that Lira first glimpsed the true scope of the cosmic cycles. The wind carried a vibration that resonated with her heartbeat, and in her mind's eye, she saw the spiral of time unfurling. Galaxies turned in patterns that mirrored the cycles of her world. Rivers followed arcs that reflected the orbits of planets, and the rise and fall of human fortunes was embedded in the larger tapestry. She understood that by teaching this knowledge, she could restore balance, not only to the Earth, but to the society that had long forgotten its place in the cosmos. Lira continued her journey, moving toward the cities that had once rejected her, determined to awaken the people to the rhythms that governed them. She knew the governors would resist, that enforcers would seek to silence her, but she also understood that the pulse was stronger than any human obstacle. It could not be destroyed, only ignored, and she would ensure that it would be remembered once more. The wilderness behind her, the cities ahead, and the infinite cycles surrounding her. Lira walked with confidence, her every step in tune with the music of the universe. She carried the knowledge of rhythm within her, and with each breath, each note of her flute, and each careful observation, she began to awaken the forgotten truth. That everything, from the smallest leaf to the largest star, moved in cycles, and that when humans remembered those cycles, they could live in harmony with the universe itself. Lira traveled through the hills and forests, the pulse of the world guiding each step, her flute slung across her back and her journals carefully tied to her belt. She had left Adric behind, carrying his lessons within her mind and heart, and yet she understood that the true test had only begun. The cities loomed in the distance, their jagged towers stark against the horizon, and she could feel the tension of the world rising as though the very air sensed her approach. The rhythm she had learned in the wilderness was faint but persistent, threading itself through the trees, the soil, and even the clouds overhead, directing her toward paths that avoided patrols and blocked roads. At first it seemed a simple task. Follow the pulse, listen to the whispers of nature, and avoid detection. But the cities were no longer places where cycles could move freely. The governors had grown arrogant, believing that human-made order could suppress the natural beat of existence. Factories roared day and night, street machines hummed ceaselessly, and the artificial lights masked the stars that once guided travelers. Lira felt the pulse waver as she approached the edges of civilization, subtle but disorienting, as though the rhythm were struggling against the imposed chaos. She found refuge in abandoned districts, places where machinery had failed and nature had begun to reclaim its space. Weeds pushed through cracks in concrete, vines curled along rusted towers, and birds nested in the hollowed spaces of buildings long forgotten. Here Lira practiced the patterns she had learned, moving deliberately, striking flint in measured beats, and letting her flute sing in the quiet of the night. She discovered that the rhythm could shape not only her understanding but also her environment. Flowers opened in response to specific sequences of notes. Puddles formed and drained with the subtle motion of her steps. Even the wind shifted direction as she walked. It was during one of these nights that she first noticed the presence of another being who, like her, seemed attuned to the hidden cycles. A figure moved silently through the ruins, barely more than a shadow, but Lira recognized the cadence immediately. The footsteps, the subtle tilts of the head, the gestures of hands, they all spoke the language of rhythm. She followed cautiously, aware that anyone who moved with such precision might be friend or foe. The figure finally emerged into the moonlight, revealing a woman of considerable age, with silver hair braided and intertwined with small charms that chimed softly as she moved. "I have been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice carrying a melodic lilt that seemed to echo the natural pulse of the world. "I am Solene, a guardian of the cycles, one of the few who remember the deeper dance." Lira felt a shiver of recognition. "Another timekeeper?" she asked. "You survived?" Solane nodded. "Survival is not the measure. Understanding and alignment are. I have watched your movements, your music, your attentiveness to the pulse. You are learning, but there is more. The dance is not merely observation, it is participation. You must learn to move in perfect harmony with the cycles, to anticipate their flows, to become a conduit for them. Over the following weeks, Selene guided Lira into the deeper intricacies of rhythm. They walked for hours along riverbeds, not merely observing the water's flow, but striking stones, tapping branches, and performing sequences of motion that aligned with lunar phases. Lira learned to feel the pull of the moon in her veins, to sense the resonance of the sun's heat through her feet, to hear the subtle harmonic vibrations in the city's abandoned machinery that echoed patterns of universal order. Selene introduced her to a method of mapping the cycles, a combination of movement, sound, and intuition. Lira practiced aligning her breath with the rotation of the planets, her heartbeat with the tides, her steps with the subtle oscillations of the earth. She realized that every element, from the motion of clouds to the blink of an eye, was part of a complex and interconnected system. When aligned, this system could generate profound harmony, but when disrupted, it could cascade into unpredictable chaos. One evening, Selene led Lira to the edge of a cliff overlooking the city. The lights below were harsh and unrelenting, streets crammed with moving bodies, machines, and towers that blocked the sky. "This," Selene said, "is where your work must begin." The people have forgotten the cycles. Their lives are disjointed, their emotions unstable, their actions chaotic. If you wish to restore balance, you must enter this chaos and teach them to remember the dance. Lira's heart pounded. How? They will not listen. They will fear the unknown. They will see me as a threat. Selene smiled faintly. Not with words, not at first. You will use rhythm itself. Music, motion, timing. These are languages older than speech. When the people feel the pulse, they will understand without being told. They will remember what was lost. Lira spent the next days preparing. She practiced intricate sequences with her flute, aligning each note to the subtle oscillations of celestial bodies, to the shifting tides of the river below, and to the movements of wind and wildlife. She rehearsed patterns of motion, gestures that communicated the cycles, and ways to guide others without speaking. She even began to anticipate human reaction, sensing the moments when fear or hesitation could disrupt alignment, and how subtle timing could turn resistance into understanding. Finally, the day came when she descended toward the outskirts of the city. The pulse was distorted here, masked by noise, light, and the mechanical hum of industry, but she could detect faint currents that responded to her presence. She chose a public square, abandoned during a temporary lull in activity, and began to play her flute. The notes were carefully measured, timed to the rise of the sun and the subtle gravitational pull she felt in her chest. At first, nothing happened. The wind seemed indifferent, and the few passers-by ignored her. But then a pigeon took flight in synchrony with her first crescendo. The flag on the nearby tower rippled exactly as she anticipated. A stray dog, paused mid-step, tilted its head in recognition. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the pulse began to grow stronger. Her music resonated with hidden patterns in the city. The sway of streetlights, the vibrations of machinery, the footsteps of people. Lira felt her own heartbeat align perfectly with the rhythm, and the city responded. She continued, guiding the invisible currents, her hands tracing arcs in the air as if conducting an unseen orchestra. People began to notice subtle changes. A calming of the wind, a sense of steadiness, an unexplainable feeling of order amidst chaos. They slowed their steps, their movements unconsciously matching the cadence she established. By the afternoon, the square was filled with people who moved in patterns they did not understand, yet felt compelled to follow. The pulse of the city was returning, slowly, imperceptibly, but unmistakably. However, the governors were aware of the disturbance. They dispatched enforcers to investigate, fearing the spread of ideas they could not control. Lira sensed them approaching through the disruption in the rhythm. Footsteps that were not aligned with the natural flow, vibrations that jarred the pulse. She knew confrontation was inevitable, yet she was no longer afraid. The deeper dance had taught her to anticipate imbalance, to adjust, to guide the cycles even when external forces tried to impose chaos. When the enforcers arrived, demanding that she cease her actions, she did not speak. Instead, she moved with them, her gestures subtle, her music precise. To their surprise, their movements began to sync with hers, the tension easing unconsciously as they too became part of the rhythm. The pulse extended outward, touching more and more of the city. Lira realized then that the forgotten cycles were not merely about nature. They were about interaction, about communication, about influencing the world in ways that words could never achieve. She could guide human emotion, human action, simply by aligning with the underlying pulse. And as she played, she began to see hints of her ultimate goal, the restoration of balance not only to the wilderness and the city, but to the human mind itself. By nightfall, the square had become a living mosaic of motion, humans and animals, wind and light, all moving as though guided by an invisible conductor. Lira, standing at the center, understood the enormity of her task. The governors would not accept this quietly. They would attempt to suppress it. But the rhythm was stronger than any edict, any weapon, any attempt to silence it. It persisted, waiting for recognition, for guidance, for someone like her to awaken it fully. In the silence after her final note, she felt the city breathe with a renewed pulse. Stars peeked through the haze above, mirrored in puddles on the cobblestones. The rhythm was alive, tangible, and for the first time, Lira sensed that she was not merely following it, she was part of it. The dance had begun, and she had stepped fully into her role as a keeper, teacher, and conductor of the cosmic cycles. The city's streets were restless as dawn crept over the horizon, the gray light reflecting off glass towers and rusted machinery alike. Lira moved carefully through the alleys, her flute slung across her back and her journals secured tightly against her chest. Every step she took pulsed with purpose, guided by the rhythm she had learned in the wilderness and refined with Soline's instruction. The subtle beat of the world beneath her feet, a vibration she could feel in her bones, whispered of pathways that avoided detection, of currents in the air that could carry her presence without revealing her, and of the spaces where her music could resonate most powerfully. She paused atop a small rise overlooking the main square, the heart of the city where commerce, governance, and daily life converged in chaotic intensity. Machines roared below, their mechanical hum a stark counterpoint to the subtle pulse of the natural world. People moved in hurried patterns, unaware of the hidden cadence that threaded through their movements, their lives dictated by schedules, obligations, and fear. The rhythm she had nurtured in the wilderness and in abandoned districts now faced its greatest test. Could it influence not just isolated pockets of life, but the heart of the city itself? Lira set her flute to her lips, inhaled deeply, and began to play. The notes were not simple melodies. They were carefully structured vibrations, each aligned with cycles of sunlight, moonlight, and even the subtle gravitational shifts that she could sense in her chest. The sound echoed across rooftops and through narrow streets, brushing against stone, glass, and metal. At first there was resistance. The machinery's roar masked her tones, the hurried footsteps of humans moved out of sync with her music, and the rhythm seemed to falter. Yet she persisted, aware that a pulse, once ignored, often required insistence to reemerge. As the minutes passed, something remarkable began to occur. A stray breeze, initially unnoticeable, picked up, carrying the notes into corners of the city she had not yet explored. Windows rattled slightly in resonance with her melody. Pigeons, startled by the subtle vibrations, began to flutter in perfect arcs, their flight a mirrored image of her flute's cadence. The pattern extended slowly, imperceptibly, touching the motions of people, the sway of trees, even the oscillations of streetlights powered by worn machinery. Each note became a thread, weaving a tapestry of order from the chaos that had long reigned. The governors, ever vigilant, noticed the change. From their high towers, they observed citizens pausing mid-step, unconsciously aligning with a tempo they could not identify. Enforcers were dispatched, moving rapidly through streets and alleys, seeking the source of the disturbance. Yet even as they approached, the pulse Lira generated guided their motions subtly. Their steps synchronized with the vibrations she played, their hands inadvertently matching gestures that resonated with the city's hidden cycles. They did not understand, but their bodies betrayed them, drawn into the pattern as if it had existed all along, and they had only forgotten how to respond. By mid-morning, the square began to shift perceptibly. People who had rushed to work halted, their movements aligning in strange yet harmonious sequences. Vendors noticed patterns in the flow of customers that had been invisible before. Children, drawn by the music, began to dance, their steps instinctively matching the rhythm. Lira's pulse merged with the pulse of the city, creating a resonance that extended outward through streets, markets, and alleyways. Even the stagnant machinery seemed to respond, pistons and gears moving with a newfound subtle grace, their vibrations aligning with the natural cycles she had summoned. The governors, enraged by the inexplicable phenomenon, attempted to intervene directly. They convened emergency councils, issuing decrees demanding that the music cease and that citizens return to their proper motions. They sent soldiers into the square, expecting to restore control through force. But when they arrived, they too found themselves involuntarily moving to the pulse. Their steps, their gestures, even the way they held weapons, began to mirror the flow of the rhythm. Resistance became futile, not because of coercion, but because the cycles themselves had taken hold. The city, responding to a law older than human decree, could not be silenced. Lira climbed to the center of the square, raising her flute high as if conducting an invisible orchestra. Her body, attuned to the cycles, moved with precision. Her feet struck the pavement in measured beats. Her arms traced arcs that mirrored planetary rotations. Her breath aligned with the subtle oscillations of the wind. Each gesture amplified the rhythm she had nurtured, sending it cascading outward. People paused, then followed, moving instinctively in harmony, their confusion giving way to an awareness they could not yet articulate but could feel deeply in their bones. As the day wore on, the city began to transform visibly. The formerly chaotic movement of people and machinery gained coherence. Patterns emerged in foot traffic, in the rise and fall of market activity, in the flow of wind through the streets. Lira watched with growing wonder as the hidden order she had felt for so long became tangible in the world around her. It was not perfect, for chaos could never be entirely eliminated, but it was balanced. The cycles she had rediscovered threaded through human life, through natural processes and even through mechanical motion, creating a harmony that had been lost for centuries. Yet the climax of her task remained, awakening the collective consciousness of the city to recognize and remember these cycles so that the rhythm could persist even in her absence. She began to play a more complex sequence on her flute, one that mimicked the larger cosmic cycles she had observed during her travels, the motion of moons around planets, the rise and fall of tides, the spin of distant galaxies. The notes formed arcs and spirals, patterns embedded in sound, resonating with every living being and even with the city's infrastructure. Those who listened could not help but move in time, drawn into the cosmic dance whether they understood it or not. Children led adults, adults guided elders, elders remembered fragments of forgotten practices. Soon, large groups moved in unison, creating a living diagram of rhythm across the square. The governor's attempts to enforce their rules became irrelevant. The city itself had become self-regulating, responding to patterns older and more powerful than human authority. Lira realized that she had not simply taught rhythm, she had restored the capacity to feel it, to participate in it consciously. The forgotten knowledge was no longer hidden. It lived again, coursing through stone, flesh, and spirit alike. As night fell, the city shimmered with new energy. Streetlights flickered in synchrony with the pulse, water in fountains rose and fell in perfect arcs, and even the stars above seemed to mirror the movements below. Lira's flute sang the final notes of her sequence, long and sustained, allowing the city to absorb the rhythm fully. She felt exhaustion wash over her, but it was a deep, fulfilling exhaustion, the kind born of alignment, purpose, and connection to something larger than oneself. From a distance, the governors observed the transformation with fear and disbelief. Their authority, built on chaos and control, had been rendered obsolete by the rediscovery of the cycles. They had attempted to dominate time, to manipulate life through force and decree, and yet the pulse of the universe had proven stronger than any human edict. Lira, standing at the center of the square, felt neither pride nor triumph. She felt a quiet, profound satisfaction. The city had remembered itself. The rhythm had returned. In the following days, people continued to move with the newly restored cadence. Markets operated more efficiently, yet more fluidly, without rigid schedules or forced obedience. Families and communities found natural patterns of activity and rest, aligned with the cycles of sun, moon, and stars. Gardens flourished as planting and harvesting once again followed the pulse of the earth. The machinery, previously a source of disorder, became a conduit for rhythm, operating in harmony with natural cycles rather than against them. Lira continued to wander the city, teaching through action rather than speech. She guided construction projects, performances, and daily activities to align with the cycles. She noticed subtle resistance at first. Humans accustomed to rigid rules and random motion struggled. But over time, even the most skeptical adjusted, drawn to the balance that now flowed through every street and home. The forgotten knowledge of rhythm, once lost to fear and ignorance, had been restored not by argument or force, but by experience and resonance. And as she looked up at the night sky, the stars spinning in arcs she now recognized as part of the same patterns that governed the city, Lira understood the full magnitude of her accomplishment. The cycles were eternal. They could be ignored, distorted, or suppressed, but they could never be destroyed. By remembering, by participating, and by teaching through rhythm, she had ensured that the knowledge would endure. The people had been awakened, the city had been aligned, and the pulse of the cosmos once again flowed through all things. Lira's flute rested against her lips one final time, and she allowed herself a moment of quiet. She felt the harmony of life, of the city, of the universe itself in every heartbeat, every gust of wind, every flicker of light. Everything moved in cycles, as it always had, and now humanity, too, had remembered how to dance with them. The forgotten knowledge of rhythm was no longer forgotten. It lived